In most modern reconstructions, the night is 16 to 17 June 1462. South of Târgoviște, thousands of Ottoman tents vanish into the darkness, broken only by watchfires and the silhouettes of horses. Somewhere inside that vast camp sleeps Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. Beyond the sentries, Wallachian riders wait in silence for a signal that may either save their country or bury them with it. Their commander is Vlad III, the voivode later remembered as the Impaler. He has not come to win a normal battle. He cannot. Mehmed's army is larger, richer, and built for prolonged war. Vlad has chosen a far more dangerous answer: break into the camp, find the imperial pavilion and kill the Sultan before dawn. If Mehmed dies, command may collapse. If he lives, Wallachia could be crushed before the summer ends. Soon horns will tear through the darkness, torches will race between the tents, riderless horses will stampede through narrow lanes, and men will strike at shapes they cannot identify. For several hours, the strongest military machine in southeastern Europe will be forced to fight inside its own camp. Yet to understand why Vlad risks everything on this single throw, we must leave the night and return to the beginning of the feud. 9 years earlier, Mehmed had done what generations of Ottoman rulers had attempted and failed to achieve. In May 1453, Constantinople fell, and the last center of the Eastern Roman Empire passed into his hands. He was only 21. By 1462, he was 30, already feared from the Danube to the Aegean, and no longer merely a young sultan with a spectacular victory. He was building an empire designed to outlive him. Mehmed was brutal, but he was never simple. His court drew Greek scholars, Muslim jurists, Italian artists, engineers, diplomats, and men who could unlock the histories of Rome and Alexander. He collected books and listened to arguments about faith, law, astronomy, and war. The same ruler who ordered cities stormed could study the ruins they left behind. His curiosity did not soften his ambition. It sharpened it. That combination made him more dangerous than the familiar image of a warrior swinging a sword in the name of religion. Mehmed understood artillery, supply, court politics, and theater. He knew when terror was useful, but also when a marriage, a hostage, or a rival claimant could achieve what an army could not. He did not merely conquer territory. He redesigned the political world around it until resistance became lonely and expensive. After Constantinople, Ottoman pressure spread across the remaining Balkan states. The Morea was subdued, Smederevo fell in 1459, and the Serbian despotate disappeared from the map. The Danube frontier now mattered more than ever. North of the river stood Wallachia, a small principality trapped between the Ottoman Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary. It was not an impregnable wall, it was a door, and both powers wanted the key. The man holding that key was born into a dynasty in which the throne was rarely inherited peacefully. Vlad III grew up among exiles, murdered relatives, rival branches, and promises that could reverse with the next campaign. His father, Vlad II Dracula, tried to survive by balancing Hungary against the Ottomans. In 1442, that balance failed, and the young Vlad and his brother Radu were surrendered as hostages to guarantee their father's obedience. The details of their captivity remain less certain than popular retellings suggest. They were held under Ottoman supervision, probably first at Eğrigeç in Anatolia, and received the education expected of valuable princely hostages. Vlad learned Turkish and absorbed the habits of the state that confined him. What we cannot safely claim is a documented childhood friendship with Mehmed. The sources do not give us that convenient scene. They belong to the same generation, however, and each understood the political system that had shaped the other. Mehmed knew how hostage princes could be used, restored, or replaced. Vlad knew how Ottoman officials negotiated, how their armies moved, and how authority radiated from the person of the Sultan. Their 1462 confrontation was not a duel between strangers. It was a collision between two men trained by the same ruthless frontier. The irony is that Ottoman power first helped Vlad seize the Wallachian throne in 1448. His reign lasted only weeks, but the episode revealed how Constantinople viewed him, not as an eternal enemy, but as one claimant among several who might serve Ottoman interests. Vlad later changed patrons, survived exile, and returned in 1456 with Hungarian support. This time, he held the throne and began breaking the factions that had made Wallachia so unstable. His rule became inseparable from exemplary punishment. Impalement was not Vlad's invention, nor was it unique to one culture. Variants of the penalty were known across Europe, the Balkans, and the Ottoman world. Vlad's innovation was political scale. He turned execution into public architecture, arranging bodies as messages for boyars, thieves, rivals, and foreign enemies. Fear became a substitute for institutions his state did not possess. At first, Vlad continued the difficult bargain expected of a Wallachian ruler. He acknowledged Ottoman supremacy and paid tribute while consolidating his authority at home. Around 1459, the payments stopped. This was not yet a declaration of heroic crusade. It was a calculated gamble made while Mehmed was occupied elsewhere. Hungary promised support, and Pope Pius II was calling Europe toward a campaign that most rulers preferred to applaud from a distance. Wallachia's position made neutrality almost impossible. If Vlad leaned toward Hungary, Mehmed could replace him. If he submitted too completely to the Porte, Hungarian forces or a rival claimant might do the same. The annual tribute was therefore more than money. It was proof that the voivode accepted his place inside the Ottoman order. Refusing it meant that every future message, audience, and border incident could become the opening move of war. By late 1461, the argument had reached its limit. Ottoman envoys demanded the arrears and summoned Vlad to appear before the Sultan. One mission, led by Hamza Bey of Nicopolis and another Ottoman representative, carried a darker purpose according to several accounts: lure the voivode into an ambush, seize him, and remove him in chains. The plan assumed that fear would bring Vlad to the meeting. Instead, he learned enough to prepare a trap of his own. North of Giurgiu, the Ottoman detachment entered ground chosen by Vlad. Wallachian troops closed around it and used handheld firearms at close range, a striking example of how quickly gunpowder was entering warfare along the Danube. Hamza and his companions were captured. The episode matters because it destroys the lazy contrast between an advanced empire and a primitive mountain prince. Vlad understood new weapons and used them with precision. He then exploited the education Ottoman captivity had given him. According to the surviving tradition, Vlad approached Giurgiu with men dressed as Ottoman soldiers and issued commands in fluent Turkish. The garrison opened the gate to what it believed was a friendly force. Wallachian troops rushed inside, recovered the fortress, and destroyed its Ottoman position. The former hostage had turned the language of the empire into a weapon against it. Hamza and the captured officials were taken north and executed by impalement. Later stories embroidered this rupture with the famous tale of envoys whose turbans were nailed to their heads because they refused to uncover before Vlad. It is a magnificent horror story and poor evidence. The motif appears in hostile pamphlets and later narratives, not in the most reliable record of the crisis. The war began over power, tribute, and control, not court etiquette. Vlad now knew that compromise had vanished. During the winter of 1461 to 1462, his forces crossed the frozen Danube and struck Ottoman settlements, garrisons, and supply points across a broad stretch of the southern bank. The raid moved fast, divided into mobile columns, and attacked before a large Ottoman response could gather. It was designed to wreck the frontier system from which Mehmed's invasion would have to be supplied. On 11 February 1462, Vlad reported the campaign to Matthias Corvinus in language as cold as an account book. He claimed that 23,184 Turks and Bulgarians had been killed, excluding those burned in their houses or beheaded without being counted. The figure cannot be independently verified, but the letter itself survives. It also makes one fact impossible to hide. This was not a clean war against soldiers alone. Civilians died in enormous numbers. Vlad presented the violence as service to Christendom and demanded the Hungarian help he believed had been promised. Yet the geography of the raid was more complicated than crusading rhetoric. Muslim communities, Ottoman troops and Christian inhabitants all lived along that frontier, and medieval labels rarely map neatly onto modern identities. The campaign was strategically effective and morally catastrophic. Both truths belong in the same sentence. News of the raids reached a ruler who could not ignore them. Vlad had destroyed imperial forces, executed a senior frontier commander, seized Giurgiu, stopped the tribute, and advertised the humiliation across Christian Europe. Mehmed now faced more than a rebellious vassal. If such defiance went unanswered, every border lord would learn the same lesson. In the spring of 1462, the Sultan began preparing a campaign large enough to erase that lesson in blood. The size of Mehmed's army is one of the campaign's oldest battlefields. Contemporary writers offered totals from 90,000 to 300,000, numbers meant as much to inspire awe as to count men. Modern estimates are usually far lower, often placing the effective force somewhere in the broad range of 40,000 to 80,000. Precision is impossible. The safe conclusion is simpler. Vlad was badly outnumbered and faced the best military system in the region. At the center marched the Janissaries, infantry tied directly to the Sultan and trained to hold when other formations broke. Around them moved cavalry, irregular raiders, provincial troops, gunners, engineers, servants, drovers, and the endless wagons required to keep an imperial host alive. This was not one solid block of soldiers. It was a moving city, hungry every hour, vulnerable not only to weapons, but to mud, thirst, disease, and delay. The Serbian Janissary Konstantin Mihailović later remembered 120 guns brought across the Danube. Chalko Kondyles also describes a fleet of 25 large vessels and 150 smaller transports, with enormous sums paid to river ship owners. Every number deserves caution, but together the reports reveal the scale of preparation. Mehmed did not march north expecting a ceremonial submission. He brought the machinery needed to force a crossing and batter fortified positions. Beside the army rode Vlad's younger brother, Radu. He had remained within the Ottoman political world and now offered Mehmed a weapon more efficient than artillery, a legitimate rival for the Wallachian throne. Whether the Sultan intended full annexation or primarily a change of ruler remains debated. Radu's presence suggests that replacement was central to the plan. Mehmed could defeat Vlad without having to occupy every forest, village, and mountain road. The invasion was therefore military and political from its first day. Ottoman proclamations could promise order under Radu, while Mehmed's columns demonstrated the cost of continued loyalty to Vlad. Every Wallachian noble now faced a private calculation: resist and risk estates, family, and life, or defect and survive beneath a new voivode. Vlad could burn crops and ambush soldiers. He could not easily destroy an alternative government traveling with the enemy. On 4th of June, the Ottomans forced the Danube crossing near Nicopolis and Turnu. Constantine's account describes Janissaries landing downstream, digging defensive trenches, and bringing more infantry over, while Wallachian attacks pressed them hard. About 300 Janissaries were killed before Ottoman artillery stabilized the bridgehead. Vlad had failed to stop the crossing. Once Mehmed and the main army reached the northern bank, the campaign entered Wallachia's interior. The voivode now confronted the truth hidden beneath every promise from Hungary. No major relief army was coming in time. Matthias Corvinus had praised Vlad's winter offensive and accepted papal money for war, but mobilizing a royal army involved diets, nobles, money, and months. Vlad had days. He may have fielded 20,000 to 30,000 men at most, many of them temporary levies rather than professionals. A frontal battle would have been magnificent suicide. So he refused one. The Wallachian army withdrew toward Târgoviște, while the countryside vanished around it. Villages were evacuated, livestock driven toward the hills, stores carried away or destroyed, and standing crops burned. What could not be moved was denied to the invader. Vlad was not defending every acre. He was converting distance into a weapon, forcing Mehmed to consume supplies faster than the landscape or his transport system could replace them. Small cavalry bands hunted foragers and isolated detachments. Roads were blocked, bridges destroyed, and movement channeled toward ground chosen for ambush. The Ottomans could seize space by day and lose control of it after sunset. Each column that left the main body in search of food risked disappearing. Each delay increased the burden on animals and wagons. Vlad's strategy did not need to defeat the whole army. It needed to make the army defeat itself. Sources also describe wells fouled, streams diverted, pits covered with branches, and low ground turned into marsh. Some details may have grown in the telling, but the larger pattern is credible and familiar. Systematic denial of food, water, shelter, and safe movement. For an army operating far from its main depots, hunger could achieve what arrows could not. Mehmed's soldiers advanced, yet the farther they marched, the more victory resembled slow suffocation. One famous claim goes further. Later narratives say Vlad released people suffering from plague, leprosy, or other illnesses into the Ottoman lines in an attempt to spread disease. The story is repeated so often that it is sometimes presented as proven biological warfare. It is not. The evidence is too thin to treat the episode as secure fact. What we can say is that sickness did threaten the camp, and rumors of deliberate infection magnified the fear. For roughly a week, the imperial army pushed through a country that seemed to contain no life. Smoke replaced villages. Empty fields offered no grain. The forest line concealed riders who attacked and vanished before heavy formations could respond. Ottoman discipline kept the march intact, but discipline could not create clean water or silence the thought that every shadow belonged to Vlad. Long before the decisive raid, the campaign had become a war of nerves. Mehmed still possessed great advantages. His artillery had secured the river crossing, his troops remained organized, and Vlad had failed to halt the advance. The Sultan could lose men, animals, and sleep and still continue. The Wallachian ruler had no such margin. Every casualty reduced the force protecting his throne. Every noble who doubted him became another opening for Radu. Time was wounding both armies, but it was killing Vlad's political position faster. By mid-June, the Ottoman host approached Târgoviște. A siege would favor Mehmed, whose engineers and guns had broken far greater defenses. An open battle would favor him even more. Vlad needed an outcome that ignored arithmetic. Killing thousands of soldiers would not be enough if the rest obeyed the Sultan. Killing the Sultan, however, might turn the camp into competing commands, frightened rumors, and a retreat before anyone understood what had happened. The idea was logical. In an empire centered on dynastic authority, Mehmed was not simply one commander among many. His death in hostile territory could provoke a succession crisis, paralyze the campaign, and encourage rebellion across the frontier. Vlad did not need to destroy the Ottoman army formation by formation. He needed to remove the mind that gave it purpose. The night attack was therefore less a battle than an assassination attempt conducted by cavalry. According to Chalka condyles, Vlad entered the Ottoman camp in disguise before the attack, using his Turkish to study its arrangement and locate the imperial quarters. The story fits his skills and appears in an early source, but it cannot be independently proven. Whether he scouted the camp himself or relied on prisoners and spies, the Wallachians obtained enough information to plan a strike toward the center rather than a random raid against the perimeter. An anonymous Italian account adds another decisive detail. Mehmed had allegedly ordered his men not to leave their assigned positions at night, fearing that a sudden alarm would dissolve the camp into panic. If the report is accurate, Vlad built his plan around the rule. Ottoman discipline would keep units from rushing blindly into the darkness, but it would also delay their response while Wallachian riders moved among tents, animals, wagons, and scattered fires. The number of attackers is uncertain. One tradition gives Vlad roughly 7,000 chosen horsemen. Another speaks of 24,000 men divided into separate forces. Medieval authors often shaped totals to praise courage or explain defeat, so the figure is less important than the selection. Vlad gathered the mobile troops he trusted most and divided the assault into coordinated wings. One would drive toward the Sultan. Another was expected to strike from the opposite side. Before the riders moved, a later account places a brief warning in Vlad's mouth. Those who thought of death should not follow him. Whether these were his exact words is unknowable, but they capture the logic of the mission. The men entering the camp would surrender the protection of formation, daylight, and familiar ground. Once among the Ottoman tents, survival depended on speed. If the attack slowed, the camp would close around them like a gate. About 3 hours after sunset, the silence broke. Wallachian horsemen surged forward beneath torches, while horns and shouting multiplied their apparent number. Early descriptions speak of repeated assaults rather than one clean charge. The riders struck, disappeared into lanes between tents, and struck again. Darkness erased uniforms and distance. A commander could hear disaster on one side of the camp and have no idea whether it was 50 paces away or half a mile. Some of Vlad's men may have worn Ottoman clothing or used Turkish commands as they entered. The tactic had worked at Giurgiu and would have been even more poisonous at night. A soldier waking to fire and screams could not trust the first armed figure he saw. Ottoman units tried to hold their assigned ground, yet the camp itself had become the enemy. Guy ropes, animals, smoke, wagons, narrow passages, and thousands of frightened men moving without a common picture. Later retellings decorate the raid with collapsing tents, exploding powder wagons, and herds deliberately driven through the sleeping camp. Not every detail can be traced with confidence. What the early accounts do support is violent confusion, torches, battle horns, dead animals, and Ottoman troops struggling to identify the attack. Horses and camels broke loose or were killed in large numbers. The sound alone must have made the raid seem larger than it was. The Wallachians did not need every Ottoman to panic. They needed uncertainty to travel faster than orders. One alarm triggered another. One rider fleeing between tents became evidence that an entire wing had collapsed. In such darkness, friendly fire was not a colorful invention but a natural risk, although its scale cannot be measured. Men trained to fight outward were suddenly striking inward into the crowded body of the army they were meant to protect. Through that chaos, Vlad drove toward a single point. The imperial pavilion was the true battlefield. Ottoman losses elsewhere mattered only if they opened a path to Mehmed. The voivode's knowledge of the camp was close but not perfect, and the night destroyed what reconnaissance had given him. His riders reached the central quarters, yet instead of the Sultan, they fell upon the tents associated with the viziers Mahmud Pasha and Ishak Pasha. This was the hinge of the night. Vlad had penetrated the camp of the most powerful ruler in the region and brought armed men within reach of the Ottoman command center. But the final distance could not be crossed. The wrong target consumed time, noise, and momentum. Mehmed's guards now understood the direction of the attack. What had begun as a blade moving through darkness became a visible enemy that disciplined troops could surround and resist. The Sultan's household and janissaries did what elite guards exist to do. They did not need to restore order across the whole camp. They needed to keep Mehmed alive until the attack exhausted itself. Defensive lines formed around the imperial position while messengers pushed outward. The Wallachians attacked again, but surprise was leaking away with every minute. Once the Sultan's location became a fortress of men, Vlad's gamble had lost its decisive purpose. One later testimony, recorded by the papal legate Niccolo of Modrush, from men connected to the campaign, blamed a second Wallachian commander for failing to strike from the opposite side. Some retellings identify him as the Boyar Galesh. The accusation may preserve a real breakdown in coordination, but its motive is hidden. Fear, confusion, missed signals, or betrayal are all possible. History gives us the failure and leaves the reason inside the dark. Had the second wing entered on time, Ottoman attention might have split, and Vlad might have reached the pavilion, or the additional troops might simply have died in the same crowded maze. Counterfactuals are seductive because they promise to finish what history interrupted. The only solid fact is that the converging attack did not happen as planned. Mehmed survived, and the Ottoman command structure, shaken but intact, began to push back. Ottoman accounts naturally emphasize recovery. Wallachian-friendly narratives emphasize terror and slaughter. Both are describing parts of the same event. The camp did not disintegrate, yet it was not calm. The attackers did not destroy the imperial army. Yet they reached its center and forced it to fight for hours under conditions Vlad had chosen. The raid was neither the effortless massacre of legend nor the insignificant skirmish of victorious propaganda. By the first light before dawn, the Wallachians began to withdraw. The decision was not panic, but arithmetic. Daylight would reveal their numbers, restore Ottoman command, and expose every route out of the camp. Vlad gathered what he could and pulled back toward ground where pursuit would be dangerous. Ottoman cavalry followed, and later reports placed substantial Wallachian losses during this retreat. The raid had entered alive. Escaping it was another battle. The casualty figures are irreconcilable. A Venetian report gives about 5,000 Wallachian dead and 15,000 Ottoman losses, while other traditions offer much smaller or larger totals. None can be treated as an audited count. Medieval numbers often served honor, blame, or diplomatic need. The honest conclusion is that both sides suffered heavily enough to remember the night, but not so heavily that either army ceased to function the following morning. This matters because the word victory can hide more than it explains. Vlad failed in his primary mission. Mehmed was alive, the imperial army remained in the field, and Târgoviște still lay ahead. Yet Mehmed had also learned that numerical superiority offered no safe night and no secure center. The Sultan could continue the campaign, but every man in his camp now knew that the Wallachian ruler had nearly placed a sword inside the imperial household. Several accounts say Mehmed ordered the camp strengthened with a trench and palisade after the attack. If so, the command was militarily sensible, not proof that the conqueror had been reduced to helpless panic. But symbols matter. The army that had crossed the Danube to hunt Vlad was now digging protection against his return. The Wallachians had not killed the Sultan. They had forced the Sultan's army to sleep, as if the darkness itself belonged to Vlad. Mehmed did not immediately flee from the battlefield, as later legend often claims. He continued toward Târgoviște and entered the abandoned capital. Vlad had denied him the siege he was equipped to win. There were no crowded streets to subdue, no ruler to capture, and no granaries waiting to supply the army. The city offered possession without decision. Then beyond it, the Ottomans encountered the image that would define the entire campaign. Along the road stood ranks of stakes, bearing the decomposing bodies of executed prisoners and enemies. Chalker Condyles describes a field several kilometers long and gives a total of about 20,000 victims. We should not confuse a chronicler's scale with a modern survey. The number may be exaggerated, and the bodies did not all come from one battle. Yet the core event is well attested. Vlad had transformed the approach to his capital into a landscape of punishment. The arrangement was deliberate. Rank remained visible even in death. Hamza, the frontier commander captured months earlier, was reportedly placed on a higher stake than those around him, his former status converted into a final insult. This was not uncontrolled rage. It was a message organized for one reader. Mehmed was meant to see what happened to Ottoman authority when it entered Vlad's reach, and every soldier behind the Sultan was meant to read it with him. Chalker Condyles says the Sultan was seized with amazement and declared that a man capable of such deeds could not easily be deprived of his country. The wording comes through a literary source, not a recording made beside Mehmed's horse, so it should not be treated as a perfect quotation. Its meaning is still powerful. The conqueror recognized that Vlad's cruelty was not random appetite. It was a system of rule, hideous in method and formidable in effect. The forest of stakes completed what the night attack had begun. One attacked the body of the Ottoman army. The other attacked its imagination. Soldiers who had survived the darkness now marched through a warning that seemed to have no end. Vlad could not match Mehmed's cannon, treasury, or manpower, so he made fear carry the weight of missing divisions. He turned dead bodies into an army that required no food, no sleep, and no command after it had been raised. Yet terror has limits. It can delay an enemy, disorder him, and make every mile costly. It cannot by itself create allies or replace lost soldiers. Mehmed remained alive, his senior commanders remained in control, and the Ottoman army was still capable of fighting. The campaign did not end in a cinematic stampede from the stakes. The Sultan continued operations, moved toward the lower Danube, joined elements of his fleet, and withdrew in organized fashion. Ottoman writers could therefore announce victory without inventing it from nothing. Mehmed had crossed the Danube, penetrated Wallachia, entered its capital, and survived Vlad's most dangerous blow. What he had not achieved was a battlefield destruction of the voivode, or the effortless annexation later stories imply. The military result remained ambiguous. The political campaign, however, was only beginning, and on that field, Mehmed possessed the sharper weapon. Radu offered exhausted Wallachian elites a future without scorched fields, mass levies, and endless retaliation. Backed by Ottoman money and troops, he promised stability under familiar tribute, rather than permanent war against an empire Wallachia could not defeat alone. Boyars who had endured Vlad's punishments now had both motive and permission to abandon him. The Sultan's brother-shaped key began opening doors that cannon had failed to break. The desertions changed the balance faster than any single battle. Vlad could still ambush Ottoman columns, but he could not rule a principality whose political class was transferring loyalty to a rival. Radu did not need to inspire the terror Vlad commanded. He needed to appear survivable. As weeks passed, more nobles and communities accepted him. The battlefield had moved from forests and riverbanks into oaths, estates, and private negotiations. Pressure also came from Moldavia, where Stephen III pursued his own claim to the strategic fortress of Chilia. His attack increased Vlad's danger, but calling Stephen a simple Ottoman ally would flatten a far more complicated rivalry. The Moldavian ruler acted for Moldavian interests and also clashed with Ottoman power at other times. In 1462, however, Vlad experienced the effect as another front opening while his own support was collapsing. By late summer, Radu held the advantage and Vlad's second reign was ending. The voivode withdrew toward Transylvania, expecting assistance from Matthias Corvinus. The Hungarian king finally arrived with an army in the autumn, but not to restore him. Europe had praised Vlad's winter victories, and papal funds had been provided for anti-Ottoman war. Still, Matthias had little desire to begin an expensive campaign after Vlad had already lost his political base. Instead of reinforcements, Vlad received chains. Matthias had him arrested near the Wallachian frontier and later circulated letters that portrayed the former voivode as secretly offering submission to Mehmed. Most modern historians consider those documents forged or manipulated to justify the arrest. They gave the Hungarian court a convenient explanation for imprisoning the man it had celebrated only months before. The Crusader was recast as a traitor. Vlad remained confined for roughly a dozen years, although the conditions and degree of freedom changed over time. During this period, German pamphlets and stories multiplied his cruelties into grotesque entertainment. Some episodes may preserve real punishments. Others are literary inventions designed to sell shock and serve politics. The historical ruler was already brutal enough. Propaganda did not need to create his violence, only remove every limit around it. Who won in 1462? If we judge the night attack by its declared purpose, Vlad failed. Mehmed survived, the Ottoman chain of command endured, and the Wallachians withdrew before daylight. Calling the raid a decisive military victory ignores its central objective. Yet calling it a failure without qualification is equally blind. Vlad penetrated the imperial camp, reached the command area, inflicted real losses, and imposed hours of fear on an army that should have been untouchable. If we judge the entire campaign, the verdict becomes colder. Vlad prevented conquest, denied Mehmed the set-piece battle he wanted, and made Wallachia extraordinarily expensive to invade. But he could not keep his throne. Mehmed left without annexing every district, yet his chosen candidate gained the principality. Radu restored Wallachia to the Ottoman orbit, and the northern frontier became more manageable. Politically, the Sultan achieved the larger goal. This is why the campaign cannot be reduced to a heroic underdog defeating an empire, or to an empire casually punishing a rebel. Both men understood different dimensions of power. Vlad mastered the immediate landscape: rivers, forests, darkness, hunger, and fear. Mehmed mastered the wider board: claimants, nobles, legitimacy, money, and time. Vlad almost won the night. Mehmed won what came after it, and history is usually ruled by what comes after. The story also exposes the danger of reading medieval chronicles as camera footage. Numbers swell, speeches become perfect, enemies are described as demons, and political murder is polished into legend. The answer is not to drain the episode of drama. The truth is dramatic enough. A small frontier principality forced one of the age's greatest armies into a campaign of exhaustion, and a ruler facing destruction gambled his country on finding one tent in the dark. For a few hours near Târgoviște, the fate of southeastern Europe may have depended on smoke, distance, and a wrong turn between two pavilions. Had Mehmed died, the Ottoman world would not have vanished, but its wars and succession might have taken a different path. He lived, Vlad fell, and Radu took the throne. The raid failed to change the dynasty of an empire. It succeeded in entering the memory of every generation that followed. Vlad's greatest weapon was not the stake, and Mehmed's was not the cannon. Each understood that power first acts inside the mind. Vlad made an army fear the night, the empty village, and the road ahead. Mehmed made Wallachian nobles fear isolation more than submission. One weapon produced a legend, the other produced a government. Between them lies the hard lesson of 1462. Terror can stop an advance, but politics decides who still rules when the smoke clears. History is filled with nights when the world turns on a gate left open, a signal never given, or a rider who reaches the wrong tent. If you want to walk through more of those forgotten moments, subscribe, light the torch of knowledge, and come with me through the centuries, through the shadows, and toward the next great story. Because the past is never silent, it is only waiting for someone to enter the dark and listen.